All right, so the data set we decided to do our project on was world happiness. The article told us that people who had higher levels of satisfaction tended to have a higher rating in interpersonal relationships and volunteer work. And interestingly enough, we found that people who had a moderate level of happiness tended to be more successful in education, income, and even professional achievements. So from this, um, we made our own theory that, or hypothesis that people who tended to be happier tended to have a greater social support network. And um, we also decided to look at the provided prompt that why the US is less happier than equivalent European countries. And some of the variables we looked into are GDP per capita, social support, life ladder, positive, negative effect, and freedom to make life choices and life expectancy. Our research of the literature found that people who rated high on self-directedness and cooperativeness also rated higher on well-being. Um, this means that people who were more confident about their futures and who had like I said before, a great social support network tended to be happier than not. Um, yeah, so this kind of supports our hypothesis that Northern European countries are happier because they have a better social support than the U.S.
All right, so Brian just presented the hypothesis and our model, and I will briefly go over descriptive statistics before getting into our data analysis and wrapping up with the conclusion. So as you can see on screen, these are the variables that we decided to look at. Namely, social support in this case does not represent social welfare. It is actually a variable from 0 to 1 corresponding to the question, if you were in trouble, do you have relatives or friends you can count on to help you whenever you need them? So this factor is actually one that measures the degree of interpersonal connection one has. And the other one that might need some explaining is the one called life ladder, which is a measure of your personal satisfaction with your life and how close you are from the best possible life for you, which is a score of 10. So after we subset the data set to look closely at these variables, we wanted to focus in on only Western countries. So that's what we are doing here. We have a lot of summary statistics, but I will go to the visual part. We thought that these line graphs would be interesting because they represent a single variable over several years for all of these sort of Western countries, we'll say. So what we discovered from these line graphs is that we can see that the US has a much lower average life expectancy than the rest of these countries. It is all the way down here from the years of 2006 to 2018. The US, UK, and Canada also exhibited a downward trend in ratings of positive affect. So this variable represents how much pleasure a citizen reports feeling on the daily. These three countries also appear to exhibit a downward trend in ratings of social support. So this was the one that measured interpersonal connection. And lastly, the US is also one of the few countries that had a downward trend in the freedom to make life choices. Moving on to our data analysis section, we created a couple of regressions which we visualized as well as a 3D model to show multiple variables. So we thought that life expectancy was one thing that would influence one's rating of life ladder, and that is very intuitive, right? And we did find a strong positive correlation that is significant based on these p-values, which are very, very small. And what we can see on this graph is that the US is highlighted in maroon over a period of multiple years from 2006 to 2018. and the Nordic countries that we wanted to explore are highlighted in blue. So we can see that over all these years, the US rates both lower on the measure of life ladder as well as life expectancy. So we saw two significant positive relationships. We also established positive relationships between freedom of choice and life expectancy, freedom of choice and life ladder, social support and life ladder, GDP and life ladder. And we thought that these were fairly intuitive, that all of these variables would support a happier life, basically. So we wanted to see all of them visualized together. And that is what we have here in this HTML section. So this visualizes life expectancy, social support, and life ladder on the same graph. We can see how these variables influence each other, and we can get a larger picture of how everything relates. And so the color scale is based on freedom of choice, and we can see positive relationships between all of the axes. You can see a positive one between social support, life ladder, social support, life expectancy. It would have been nice to be able to visualize where the US was and where all of the European countries were on this graph, but my coding skills were not advanced enough. And here another one. This depicts multiple variables, life ladder, GDP, and freedom of choice on the same graph. The weakest association, I would say, is the one between GDP and freedom of choice. You could say it has a positive trend, but that would kind of be stretching it. To wrap up, we believe that we could have done better to specifically answer to our hypothesis if we focused on the US and within the US specifically. It remains to be said whether Americans are less happy because they sacrifice their happiness for personal achievement or because of something else. Of course, we do need to compare with the other countries that are similar to America in certain respects. We assume these to be Western liberal democracies in Europe as well as Canada. We thought it would be helpful in the future to have a data set like some sort of census for US citizens reporting their levels of income as well as possible other factors such as emotions aside from happiness, basically how often they felt lonely or depressed. And finally, we had the option of basically looking at less variables so that it would be, on the whole, a more focused report, or trying to have more visuals to show like all of the possible interrelationships and sort of picking the most interesting ones. And that concludes our presentation.